My sister told me my partner was cheating, so when I asked him directly, he swore he wasn't. But I created a fake dating profile, caught him red-handed, and exposed everything to his religious mother who now threatens to disown him. Hey everyone, my name is Maya, and I'm 26 years old. Until 4 months ago, I was living what most people would consider the perfect life. I had everything together both personally and professionally, and from the outside, my life probably looked like a flawless Instagram feed. I genuinely believed I had found my soulmate in Blake, and everything seemed to be falling into place exactly as I had always dreamed it would. Blake appeared to be absolutely perfect in every conceivable way. He was charming and successful, and he came from what seemed like a good family background. We had been together for almost 3 years at that point, and I was seriously thinking about taking the next step and moving in together. The relationship felt solid, committed, and ready for the future we had been talking about building together. His ultra-religious mother, Patricia, had already started calling me her future daughter-in-law, which made me feel incredibly welcomed into their family. She would constantly drop hints about summer weddings, and I could tell she was genuinely excited about the possibility of us getting married. Everything in my life seemed to be falling into place perfectly, and I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Then my best friend since college, Zoe, sent me a screenshot that changed absolutely everything in my world. She texted me with a simple message. Maya, isn't this Blake? Along with that text came a photo that made my stomach drop to the floor. It was a screenshot of his dating profile. There was his face, that same cocky smile I knew so well, staring back at me from what was clearly an active dating app account. What made the situation even more devastating were the photos he had chosen to use on his profile. Some of them included pictures from our vacation to Sonoma just last month, a trip we had taken together, sharing what I thought were intimate, couple moments. Seeing those photos repurposed for his dating profile felt like a betrayal on multiple levels. When I confronted Blake that Tuesday evening, he looked genuinely hurt and shocked by my accusations. Babe, that's an old profile I forgot to delete, he said with conviction. I can't believe you'd think I'm cheating on you. His voice even cracked a little bit, and for a brief moment, I almost felt guilty for doubting him. The performance was so convincing that I nearly believed his innocent act completely. I'm not accusing you of anything, I said as calmly as I could manage. I just wanted to ask you about it and give you a chance to explain. He immediately pulled me into a tight hug and whispered, You're the only one for me, Maya. You know that, right? I hugged him back and said all the right things, but something deep inside me felt fundamentally changed. That night, after Blake fell asleep beside me, I quietly downloaded the dating app myself. Creating a fake profile felt completely surreal, like I was stepping into someone else's life. I used photos from a friend's Instagram account with her permission, obviously, and called myself Ashley. Generic enough and pretty enough, but definitely not me. Within an hour of swiping through profiles, we matched. My heart was pounding out of my chest as I typed my first message. Hey there, you seem interesting. His response came back with lightning speed. Thanks, you're gorgeous. What brings you to this app? I played it casual and flirty, responding with, Just looking to meet someone genuine. Are you single, Blake, and looking for someone special? I stared at his response for a solid 10 minutes, reading those words over and over again. Someone special, while I was literally sleeping in his bed every other night of the week. The irony was crushing, but what came next was so much worse than I could have ever imagined. I just got out of a relationship, actually, he continued in his message to my fake profile. My ex was getting super clingy all the time, always wanting to hang out, always checking up on me. I need someone more independent, you know? The word clingy hit me like a physical blow. That's what 3 years of love and commitment looked like to him, clingy behavior from someone who was getting too attached. I felt sick to my stomach realizing that everything I thought we had built together was being described to a stranger as suffocating and needy. I immediately started screenshotting absolutely everything. Every single message where he trashed our relationship to a complete stranger he was trying to hook up with, every flirty comment, and every single lie he told about his relationship status. The evidence was mounting, and I knew I needed to document it all before he had a chance to delete anything or cover his tracks. Then I did something I've never done before in my entire life. Something that would change everything. I sent all the screenshots to his mother, Patricia. Her number was saved in my phone as Future MIL, which now seems incredibly cringe looking back, but at 3 a.m., fueled by pure betrayal and righteous anger, I typed out a simple message. Hi, Patricia. Thought you should know what your son considers special. Attach screenshots. I hit send before I could chicken out completely. My phone started ringing at exactly 7:23 a.m. the next morning. Blake's contact photo, him at his cousin's wedding looking disgustingly happy, filled my entire screen. Maya, please, you have to help me, he said before I could even properly say hello. His voice was panicked and completely desperate, a tone I had never heard from him before. My mom is threatening to cut me off financially. Please tell her it was all a misunderstanding. Was it? I asked him directly, cutting through his panic. What exactly was the misunderstanding here, Blake? Were you or were you not actively using that dating app while we were together for 3 years? Complete silence followed from his end of the phone. Blake, it's complicated, he finally managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. No, it's really not complicated at all, I replied firmly. That's when he started crying actual tears, which completely threw me off guard because Blake never cried about anything. He was always Mr. Cool and collected, always the guy who had everything under perfect control. Maya, you don't understand the situation, he said through his tears. If my mom cuts me off, I'm completely screwed. Like totally and utterly screwed. I owe some people money, and without her financial support... His voice trailed off, and I could hear the genuine fear in his tone. What people? What money exactly? I pressed, sensing there was much more to this story than just cheating. More awkward silence followed before he finally admitted, I might have a small gambling problem. Small, right? About 30 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time it was Patricia calling directly. Maya, sweetheart, we really need to talk, she said, her usually warm voice sounding completely strained and exhausted. Can you come over to the house? There are things about Blake you don't know, and I think it's time you learned the truth. I'd been to the Martinez family home dozens of times over the course of our relationship. It was a sprawling colonial-style house located in the nicest part of town, complete with a 4-car garage and professionally landscaped gardens that always looked like something out of a magazine. Patricia had always made me feel completely welcome there, constantly asking about my volunteer work, praising my sweet nature and kind heart, and telling me how absolutely perfect I was for her son. She had this way of making me feel like I was already part of the family. Today, however, she looked completely exhausted when she opened the door. The usual warmth in her eyes was replaced by something that looked like defeat mixed with desperation. Sit down, honey, she said, gesturing toward the expensive leather couch in their formal living room. I need to be completely honest with you about something that I probably should have told you a long time ago. She poured herself coffee with noticeably shaking hands, and I could see that whatever she was about to tell me was weighing heavily on her mind. This isn't Blake's first incident, she began, and the way she said the word incident made my blood run cold. The cheating, the lying, the dating apps. She was treating all of this like it was just another episode in a pattern of behavior. Patricia sighed heavily and looked completely defeated as she continued. 4 years ago, there was a woman named Vanessa. She was going to expose him at his workplace for similar behavior, so I paid her to keep quiet. The words came out like a confession she had been holding in for years. You paid her what? I asked, not sure I had heard her correctly. $30,000, Patricia whispered, barely able to meet my eyes. She was pregnant, and Blake had just disappeared on her. Left her to handle everything completely alone, and she was threatening to go to his boss and tell everyone what kind of person he really was. I felt physically sick to my stomach hearing this. The man I had been planning a future with had not only cheated before, but had abandoned a pregnant woman, and then had his mother pay her off to keep quiet about it. Patricia, why are you telling me this now? I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew where this conversation was heading. Because I'm tired, Maya. I'm so incredibly tired of covering for him and his behavior, she said, her voice breaking slightly. But if you could just tell people that this was all a misunderstanding somehow, maybe we could get through this situation. I could pay for couples therapy, the absolute best that money can buy. We could work through this together as a family. I stared at this woman who had welcomed me into her family with open arms, who had talked constantly about grandchildren and detailed wedding plans for Blake and me, who was now asking me to lie to protect her son's reputation. The woman who had just admitted to paying off his previous victim was now asking me to become complicit in covering up his current behavior. No, I said quietly but firmly, standing up from the couch. Maya, please, I'm begging you, she continued, her voice becoming more desperate. No, I repeated, my voice stronger this time. I won't lie for him, Patricia, and honestly, you shouldn't either. This pattern of behavior isn't going to stop just because we pretend it didn't happen. Over the next week, Blake completely lost his mind in ways I never could have anticipated. First came the fake social media accounts. Suddenly, posts started appearing on Facebook groups we both belonged to, calling me a psycho ex-girlfriend who had catfished him for revenge. These posts included detailed descriptions of our private intimate moments, my workplace information posted publicly, and even photos of my apartment building with identifying details clearly visible. The situation escalated quickly when my boss pulled me aside on Thursday morning. Maya, I've been getting some very concerning calls about you from someone claiming to be a family friend, she said with obvious worry in her voice. This person says you're having some kind of mental health crisis and that people should be aware of your unstable behavior. That would be my ex-boyfriend's mother, I said, immediately realizing how completely insane that statement sounded coming out of my mouth. The look on my boss's face confirmed that this situation had moved far beyond normal breakup drama into something much more serious and potentially damaging to my reputation and career. Then Blake started showing up at random places, seemingly everywhere I went. He would appear in my apartment building lobby constantly, lurking around like he belonged there. He'd be at the coffee shop where I grabbed lunch daily, always positioned where he could see me, but acting like the encounters were coincidental. Even at the gym where I'd been a member for 4 years, he would suddenly materialize, always carrying flowers and always wearing the same desperate expression that made my skin crawl. "We belong together, Maya," he said one afternoon, cornering me outside Whole Foods while I was just trying to buy groceries. "You know we do. This is just a rough patch that every couple goes through. We can work through this if you just give me a chance to make things right." The intensity in his eyes was genuinely frightening, and I realized this wasn't just persistence. This was becoming stalking behavior. I started varying my entire routine dramatically to avoid these encounters. I switched to different grocery stores, found new gym locations across town, and took completely different routes to work every single day. I thought I was being smart and unpredictable, but somehow he always managed to find me anyway. It was like he had some kind of tracking system, and the constant fear of running into him was making me feel like a prisoner in my own life. The phone calls were absolutely the worst part of this nightmare. My number was blocked, but he'd use different phones to get around it. Friends' phones, work phones, random numbers I didn't recognize. Some days I would receive 25 to 35 calls, sometimes even more than that. When I finally answered one, thinking it might be something important related to work or family, he was sobbing uncontrollably on the other end. "I can't live without you, Maya. I can't," he cried into the phone. "You have to forgive me, please. I'm falling apart without you in my life." The manipulation was so obvious, but hearing someone I had once loved in such apparent distress was still emotionally confusing and draining. Then my friends started getting calls too, which took his harassment campaign to an entirely new level. Blake was calling them, claiming that I was suicidal, that he was deeply worried about my safety, and that someone needed to check on me immediately because I wasn't answering his calls. He was painting himself as the concerned ex-boyfriend who was just trying to make sure I was okay. Zoe called me absolutely furious after receiving one of these calls. "What the hell is wrong with him?" she demanded. "He called me at work saying you might hurt yourself and that I should drive over to your apartment immediately to check on you. I almost left an important meeting because I was so worried." The fact that he was manipulating my closest friends and making them fear for my safety was the final straw. That's when I knew the situation had gone way too far and I needed to take more serious action. I was researching restraining orders online, trying to figure out the legal process, when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Hi, this is Bella, Blake's sister. Can we talk? I have something important to show you that I think you need to see." I remembered Bella from various family gatherings over the years. She was Blake's younger sister, away at college, and seemed like a sweet kid, maybe 24 years old. We'd only met a few times during holidays and family events, but she had always been friendly and seemed genuinely nice. The fact that she was reaching out to me voluntarily was both surprising and concerning. We agreed to meet at a Starbucks near her campus the next day. When I arrived, she looked nervous and kept constantly checking over her shoulder, like she was afraid someone might see us together. "I've been wanting to reach out to you for months," she said, as she slid a manila folder across the table toward me. "But I didn't know how to approach you about this, and honestly, I was scared of what Blake might do if he found out I was interfering in his business." Inside the folder were photos, lots of them, and what I saw made my stomach drop all over again. There were pictures of Blake with different women at family barbecues, at the country club during various social events, and even at his cousin's wedding. The same wedding where that cute photo of us together had been taken, the one I treasured as a symbol of our relationship and future together. In every single picture, he had his arm around someone who definitely wasn't me. And according to Bella, he was introducing each of these women as his girlfriend to family and friends. "I took these secretly," Bella said quietly, glancing around the coffee shop to make sure no one was listening. "I knew something was seriously wrong when he kept bringing different girls around constantly to family events. But Mom always made excuses for his behavior. She would say things like, 'Oh, that's just a friend of Blake's,' or 'that's his coworker from the office.' But I heard him introduce at least 4 different women as his girlfriend this year alone, and that was just at events I attended." But the photos weren't the worst part. Bella also had videos on her phone that made the situation even more disturbing. There was footage of Blake giving house tours to random women, showing them around the family property, like he was already planning a future with them. Another video showed him making out with someone in their family's pool house during what was supposed to be a casual family gathering. Most damaging of all were recordings of Blake bragging to his college buddies about keeping multiple plates spinning simultaneously, and how easy it was to juggle different relationships without any of the women finding out. "He brought one girl to Christmas dinner last year," Bella continued. her voice filled with disgust at her own brother's behavior. This was while you were visiting your own family for the holidays, so you had no idea. He told everyone she was the one, and that he was planning to propose soon. Mom made her favorite dessert and everything, welcoming her into the family just like she did with you. Meanwhile, he was telling you the exact same things about your relationship. I felt completely nauseous hearing all of this. The scope of his deception was so much larger than I had ever imagined. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked, though I wasn't sure I really wanted to know the answer. I tried to hint at it a few times during family gatherings, she explained, looking genuinely remorseful. But you always seemed so happy with him, and honestly, I was afraid Blake would take it out on me if he found out I was interfering with his relationships. He can be really vindictive when people cross him, and I didn't want to become his next target. She paused and looked directly at me with a serious expression. But what he's doing to you now, the stalking, the harassment campaign, trying to destroy your reputation, that's absolutely not okay. Someone needs to stop him immediately before this gets even worse than it already has. That night, I made a decision that would change absolutely everything moving forward. I sat down at my computer and created a detailed timeline of events, documenting everything that had happened from the beginning. I included every screenshot from the dating app conversations, every photo that Bella had shared with me, all of Blake's dating app profiles, because as it turned out, he had multiple active accounts on different platforms, and the messages where he had called me clingy and described our 3-year relationship as suffocating to complete strangers. I also documented his entire harassment campaign against me, including the fake social media posts, the calls to my workplace, the stalking incidents, and the manipulation of my friends and family members. Additionally, I included photos of him with other women at family events that clearly showed he had been cheating throughout our entire relationship, not just recently. Through some creative online searching, I even found evidence of his gambling debts and the financial trouble he had mentioned during his panicked phone call. And then I posted it all in his mother's church Facebook group. "Hi everyone," I wrote carefully, making sure my tone was respectful but firm. "I know many of you have been generous supporters of Blake Martinez over the years, donating to his business ventures and treating him like family. I thought you should know who you've been supporting all this time." The post included absolutely everything: a clear timeline of his cheating behavior, screenshots of him trashing our relationship to strangers, evidence of his financial lies and gambling issues, and detailed documentation of his current harassment campaign against me. Within an hour, there were over 250 comments on the post. But instead of people defending Blake like I had expected, people I'd never met were sharing their own stories about Blake and his behavior. The response was overwhelming and eye-opening, in ways I never could have anticipated. Mrs. Steinberg from the church choir revealed that she had lent him $4,000 for a business opportunity that never materialized, and he had been avoiding her calls for months when she tried to ask about getting her money back. The Thompson family shared that they had trusted him to plan their daughter's wedding, and he had disappeared completely with their deposit, leaving them scrambling to find another wedding planner just weeks before the ceremony. The stories kept coming, and a pattern of financial manipulation and theft was becoming increasingly clear. This wasn't just about cheating and lying in relationships. Blake had been systematically taking advantage of the trust and generosity of his mother's church community for years. Patricia called me within hours of the post going live, and she was actually screaming into the phone, something I had never experienced from her before. "How dare you destroy our family's reputation like this?" she shouted, her voice filled with rage and desperation. "Do you have any idea what you've done to us? Do you understand the consequences of your vindictive actions?" "I've told the truth," I said as calmly as I could manage, refusing to let her anger intimidate me. "Something you should have done years ago instead of enabling his behavior and covering up his crimes." "I'll sue you for defamation," she threatened, her voice becoming even more shrill. "I'll take you to court and ruin your life just like you've ruined ours." With what lawyer? I thought to myself, remembering what I had learned about their financial situation. "Blake has put you into serious financial trouble with his gambling debts, hasn't he, Patricia?" Complete silence followed from her end of the phone, confirming what I already suspected. "I didn't destroy your family, Patricia," I continued firmly. "Blake did that all by himself with his choices and his actions. I just stopped pretending that everything was fine and that his behavior was acceptable. I stopped being complicit in covering up the truth." But Blake wasn't done with me, not even close to being finished with his campaign of harassment. When the church post went viral, apparently several members had shared it in their own community groups across social media, Blake went completely off the rails in ways that were genuinely frightening. He started targeting my family members directly, which crossed a line I never thought he would dare to cross. My 19-year-old niece called me crying hysterically one evening. "Aunt Maya, some guy has been messaging me on Instagram saying awful things about you," she sobbed into the phone. "He says you seduced him and manipulated him, and that our whole family are liars and terrible people. He's been sending me really graphic messages about you that are making me feel sick. But the call that made me see red and realize I needed immediate legal intervention came the next day. My 80-year-old grandmother Rose, who is honestly the sweetest woman on earth and has never hurt anyone in her entire life, had received a Facebook message from Blake. In this message, he had included graphic details about our intimate relationship, describing private moments in explicit terms that no elderly grandmother should ever have to read about her granddaughter. The shock and distress of receiving such inappropriate and disturbing content had caused my grandmother to have a panic attack. She was currently in the emergency room being treated, and I knew that Blake had crossed every possible line of decency and legality with his behavior. I drove straight to the police station that afternoon, my hands shaking with rage and determination. I need to file a restraining order, I told Officer Rodriguez at the front desk. And I think there might be some identity theft involved as well, based on some things I've discovered recently. Officer Rodriguez was incredibly patient and professional as I laid out the entire story for him. I explained the stalking behavior, the harassment campaign targeting not just me, but my friends and family members, the threats, and the specific targeting of my elderly grandmother with sexually explicit content. I showed him screenshots, witness statements from friends who had received the manipulative phone calls, and security footage from my apartment building that clearly showed Blake loitering around my home. "We'll definitely pursue the restraining order based on what you've shown me," he said after reviewing all the evidence. "But you mentioned identity theft. Can you tell me more about what makes you think that's happening?" That's when I showed him the credit report I had pulled that morning after a nagging suspicion prompted me to check my financial records. There were 4 credit cards that I had never opened, all with recent activity and charges I had never made. All of these accounts were linked to my name and social security number, but the statements and cards were being sent to Blake's address instead of mine. "It looks like he's been intercepting your mail and using your personal information for financial fraud," Officer Rodriguez said, studying the documents carefully with growing concern. "Maya, this isn't just stalking and harassment anymore. This is a federal crime we're looking at here. Identity theft and mail fraud are serious charges that carry significant prison time." The investigation moved surprisingly fast once law enforcement got involved, but the deeper they dug into Blake's activities, the more horrifying the situation became. Detective Chen, who had been assigned to my case, called me in for a follow-up interview just 4 days after I filed the initial report. "Maya, we need to talk about what we've found," she said, gesturing for me to sit down in the small conference room at the police station. Her expression was serious in a way that made my stomach drop. "This is much bigger than simple identity theft and stalking. Much, much bigger than we initially thought when you first came in." She spread out a series of documents across the table in front of me. Bank statements, credit applications, investment contracts, all with signatures that looked familiar, but definitely weren't mine. The scope of what I was looking at was overwhelming and terrifying. "Blake's been using your identity for over 20 months, Detective Chen explained, her voice grave. "Not just for credit cards like we first thought when you came in. He opened a business account in your name, took out a small business loan for $85,000, and has been running what appears to be a Ponzi scheme, targeting elderly church members specifically." My head started spinning uncontrollably as I tried to process what she was telling me. "A Ponzi scheme? What do you mean exactly?" I asked, feeling like I was in some kind of nightmare. "He's been selling fake investment opportunities to senior citizens, promising them 18% returns on something called Martinez Digital Solutions," she continued, flipping through official-looking documents. "The business exists only on paper, registered to your name and social security number. When early investors wanted their promised returns, he'd pay them with money from new investors. It's a classic Ponzi scheme structure." "How much money are we talking about here?" I asked, dreading the answer but needing to know the full scope of what had been done in my name. Detective Chen flipped through her notes carefully before answering. "So far, we've identified $360,000 in fraudulent investments from victims. But Maya, that's not even the worst part of what we've discovered." She pulled out another thick folder and placed it in front of me. "Your boyfriend has been doing the same scheme in multiple states. We've been in contact with authorities in Georgia, Virginia, and North Carolina. Similar schemes, similar tactics, always targeting religious communities where his mother had connections and influence." The room felt like it was spinning around me. "Patricia knew about this?" I managed to ask, though I was starting to suspect I already knew the answer. "Patricia wasn't just enabling Blake out of maternal love," Detective Chen continued, her expression becoming even more serious. "She was his business partner in the fraud. The church renovation fund that Blake supposedly managed? That was their way of laundering money from the investment scams. Patricia would report fake construction expenses, withdraw cash from the church account, and Blake would use it to pay off early investors to keep the scheme running smoothly." I felt like I was going to throw up. I'd been dating a career criminal. I'd been planning a future with someone who was systematically destroying people's retirement savings, and his mother was helping him do it. There's more, Detective Chen continued gently, clearly seeing how overwhelmed I was becoming. We found evidence that Blake has been running this type of scam for at least 6 years. Vanessa, the woman from Tampa that his mother told you about, she wasn't just his girlfriend who got pregnant. She was his first business partner in the fraud scheme. The pieces were suddenly falling into place in the most horrifying way possible. When she got pregnant and started asking questions about where all the money was really coming from, he panicked and cut her out of the operation completely. That's why Patricia paid her off. It wasn't hush money about cheating and abandoning a pregnant girlfriend. It was hush money about fraud, I finished, the reality of the situation hitting me like a physical blow. Detective Chen nodded and showed me photos that had been recovered from Blake's laptop computer. There were screenshots of bank accounts in different names, fake business registrations for companies that didn't exist, and even a detailed spreadsheet tracking which investors had been paid their promised returns, and which ones were getting suspicious and asking too many questions. We're talking about federal charges now, she explained. Wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. Blake and Patricia are looking at serious prison time, potentially decades behind bars if they're convicted on all counts. The next few weeks were a complete blur of FBI interviews, victim impact statements, and media attention that I definitely didn't want. Apparently, the story of local woman's dating app revenge exposes multi-million-dollar fraud ring was too juicy for the local news outlets to ignore, and my phone was constantly ringing with reporters wanting exclusive interviews. But the most heartbreaking part was when the investigators started putting me in contact with the victims who wanted to share their stories. Mrs. Dupuis, who was 84 years old, had invested her entire life savings, $52,000, in Blake's fake company because Patricia had personally vouched for him at church. Mr. Wagner had borrowed against his home to invest $35,000, hoping to leave something substantial for his grandchildren. The Williams family had liquidated their daughter's college fund, $28,000, because Blake had promised them it would double in just 8 months. Each conversation was more devastating than the last. These weren't wealthy people who could afford to lose money on risky investments. These were retirees on fixed incomes, immigrants who had worked their whole lives to build small nest eggs, and families trying to get ahead financially. And I'd been sleeping next to the person who was systematically destroying their lives while pretending to love me. The guilt was absolutely overwhelming, consuming my thoughts day and night. How had I not known about any of this massive criminal operation? How had I missed signs of something this enormous happening right under my nose? How could I have been so blind to the fact that the man I loved was destroying people's lives on a daily basis? Dr. Elise Fontaine, the therapist I started seeing twice a week to help me work through everything, was incredibly helpful in putting things into perspective. Maya, you're not responsible for Blake's crimes, she said during one particularly rough session, where I was blaming myself for not seeing the signs. Criminals are often extremely skilled at compartmentalization. They create completely different personas for different parts of their lives, and they're very good at keeping those worlds separate. But I lived with him half the time, I protested, still struggling with feelings of guilt and stupidity. How did I not see bank statements or business documents or something suspicious? How was I so completely clueless about what he was really doing? Did you ever see his mail? She asked, helping me think through the practical details of our relationship. I thought about it carefully before responding. No, actually. He said he had everything sent to his office for security reasons. He told me it was standard practice for people in his line of work. Did you ever go to his office or see where he actually worked? She continued. He said his company was transitioning to remote work, so he mostly worked from coffee shops or co-working spaces around town. I thought that was normal for a tech startup. As I said the words out loud, I realized how many of his explanations had been designed to keep me away from any evidence of his real activities. Dr. Fontaine nodded knowingly. Blake created an elaborate fiction, specifically designed to keep you separated from his criminal activities. That's not naivety on your part. That's sophisticated manipulation by someone with years of experience deceiving people who care about him. She was right, but it still hurt deeply to realize how thoroughly I had been played. All those times I had bragged to friends about my successful boyfriend with his own business. All those family dinners where I had talked proudly about Blake's entrepreneurial spirit and business acumen. I had been unknowingly helping to legitimize his cover story and make his fraud seem more credible to potential victims. The trial was scheduled for 8 months out, but the media attention meant that everyone in town knew what was happening long before the court proceedings began. I couldn't go to the grocery store without getting stared at and whispered about by people I had never met. Some people were sympathetic and supportive, coming up to me to say things like, "You're so brave for exposing him and protecting all those victims." But others were clearly blaming me for bringing shame and scandal to the community. They seemed to think I was a vindictive ex-girlfriend who had gone too far in seeking revenge, and that I was somehow responsible for destroying a respected family's reputation. Patricia's church friends were absolutely the worst when it came to this victim-blaming mentality. There was a group of older women who had known her for decades and simply couldn't believe that their precious Patricia could be involved in anything criminal. In their minds, I was the vindictive ex-girlfriend who had made up elaborate lies to hurt an innocent family who had done nothing but welcome me with open arms. Mrs. Fisher, who had led the church choir for 35 years and was considered a pillar of the community, cornered me at the post office one day with pure venom in her voice. "You should be absolutely ashamed of yourself," she hissed at me like I was the worst kind of person. Patricia Martinez is a religious woman who's done nothing but serve this community faithfully for decades. The fact that you're dragging her into your sordid revenge fantasy is absolutely disgusting behavior. "Mrs. Fisher," Patricia pleaded guilty to embezzlement. I replied calmly, trying to stick to the facts. "The FBI has bank records and documented evidence of everything she did." "I don't want to hear your lies," she cut me off angrily, refusing to listen to any evidence that contradicted her preconceived notions. "That poor woman is being prosecuted because you couldn't handle being dumped properly by her son. You're destroying an innocent family because your feelings got hurt." It was infuriating but also educational in a weird way. I was getting a real-time lesson in how communities protect their own members, even when those members are proven criminals. Patricia had spent decades building relationships, doing charity work, and projecting an image of moral authority. People who had known her for that long simply couldn't reconcile their mental image of her with the reality of her crimes. I became the easier target, the outsider, the troublemaker who had disrupted their comfortable illusions about people they thought they knew. It was easier for them to believe that I was lying than to accept that they had been fooled by someone they trusted for years. Thankfully, not everyone in the community felt that way. The victims and their families were incredibly supportive of me throughout the entire ordeal. We formed an unofficial support group that met monthly at the community center to share updates about the legal proceedings and develop coping strategies for dealing with the financial and emotional aftermath of the fraud. Linda Martinez, whose elderly parents had lost $18,000 in Blake's scheme, became one of my closest allies during this difficult time. "My father worked construction for 45 years, she told our support group one evening, tears streaming down her face as she spoke. Every single dollar they invested was money he earned with his hands, his back, and his sweat. Blake Martinez didn't just steal money from my parents. He stole their dignity, their trust in people, and their ability to sleep at night without constantly worrying about bills." The support group gradually grew to include more than just the financial victims of Blake's fraud. Vanessa flew in from Tampa and stayed for several weeks, helping other women in the group process the psychological manipulation they had experienced with Blake. Her insights were invaluable because she understood his patterns better than anyone. "Blake's behavior pattern was always exactly the same," she explained during one meeting that was particularly emotional for everyone involved. "Love bombing at the beginning to make you feel special and chosen. Gradual isolation from friends and family so you become dependent on him. Financial control through various manipulative tactics. And then complete abandonment when you became inconvenient to his plans. The fraud scheme was just another layer of the same manipulative behavior he used in personal relationships." During this time, 2 other women came forward with similar stories about Blake that painted an even clearer picture of his systematic approach to manipulation. Jennifer from Georgia, who had dated Blake 4 years ago, discovered that he had been using her address to receive fake business documents and official-looking mail related to his fraudulent companies. Crystal from North Carolina had briefly lived with Blake and found out later that he had been intercepting her mail and using her personal information for credit applications without her knowledge or consent. "He told me he was handling my mail to help me stay organized," Crystal said, shaking her head in disbelief at how easily she had been manipulated. "I was working 65 hours a week at 2 different jobs and genuinely appreciated not having to deal with bills and paperwork when I got home. I had absolutely no idea he was literally stealing my identity and using my information for financial crimes." The FBI estimated that Blake had victimized over 220 people across 4 states over the course of 6 years. The total financial losses added up to more than $2.6 million, representing life savings, retirement funds, college money, and emergency funds that families had worked decades to accumulate. As the trial date approached, Blake's defense team tried every possible legal strategy to minimize his responsibility and avoid the serious prison time he was facing. They claimed he was actually the victim of his mother's manipulation, and that she had pressured him into participating in the fraud schemes. They suggested he had a gambling addiction that had impaired his judgment severely and made him vulnerable to bad influences. Most insulting of all, they even tried to argue that I had entrapped him by creating the fake dating profile that initially exposed his cheating behavior. That last defense strategy was particularly offensive to me. According to his lawyers, Blake was somehow the real victim in this entire situation because I had deceived him into revealing his true character. They were essentially arguing that catching someone in the act of lying and cheating constituted entrapment, which was both legally ridiculous and morally outrageous. The prosecution, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Rebecca Chen, was having absolutely none of these ridiculous defense arguments. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she said during her powerful opening statement, "the defendant wants you to believe he's a victim of circumstances beyond his control. But the evidence will show you a man who systematically exploited the trust of vulnerable people for 6 years continuously. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a mistake made under pressure. This was a career built on deception, manipulation, and the deliberate targeting of people who trusted him because of his family connections." The first week of testimony was absolutely devastating for Blake's defense strategy. The FBI financial crime specialist walked the jury through a massive, detailed flowchart showing exactly how money moved between fake accounts, shell companies, and personal bank accounts. The paper trail was overwhelming and undeniable, showing a sophisticated operation that had been carefully planned and executed over many years. Detective Chen testified about the extensive evidence found in Blake's apartment during the search warrant execution. This included fake business cards and letterhead for companies that didn't actually exist anywhere, detailed databases of potential victims organized by various categories, and most damning of all, a spreadsheet where Blake had actually rated people's gullibility and vulnerability to his schemes. Yes, he had literally created a rating system for how easy different people would be to scam. Mrs. Dupuis had received a 9 out of 10 rating, and Mr. Wagner had been given an 8 out of 10. The notes next to their names included chilling observations like "trusts authority figures without question" and "desperate for steady income to supplement retirement." Patricia's testimony was supposed to be the cornerstone of Blake's defense strategy, but it backfired spectacularly in ways that his legal team clearly hadn't anticipated. She took the stand and tried to claim that Blake had manipulated her into helping with the church finances, portraying herself as an unwitting accomplice who didn't understand what was really happening behind the scenes. According to her testimony, she was just a loving mother who had been scared and coerced by her son into participating in activities she didn't fully comprehend. She painted herself as another victim of Blake's manipulation, someone who had been taken advantage of because of her trusting nature and maternal instincts. Then the prosecution played recorded phone calls from the jail where Blake was being held while awaiting trial. Blake's voice filled the entire courtroom as the recording began. "Mom, you need to stick to the story we discussed. Tell them I threatened you, that you were scared of me and didn't have a choice in what happened. Play up the victim angle as much as possible," Blake's voice continued on the recording. "Cry on the stand if you have to. Make them believe that I forced you into this situation and that you had no idea what we were really doing." "But Blake, honey, I don't think I can—" Patricia's voice could be heard responding. "Mom, listen to me very carefully," Blake interrupted her, his tone becoming sharp and controlling. "If you don't sell this performance convincingly, we're both going to prison for 25 years or more. You need to make them believe that I was the mastermind who manipulated you into everything. You need to make them see you as a victim, not as my business partner." The expressions on the jury members' faces said absolutely everything. This wasn't the testimony of a manipulated mother trying to protect her son out of love and fear. This was clear evidence of a criminal conspiracy between two people who saw elderly church members as easy targets to exploit for financial gain. When my turn came to testify, Blake's lawyer attempted to paint me as a vengeful ex-girlfriend whose actions had nothing whatsoever to do with the financial crimes themselves. He tried to make the case that my motivations were purely personal and that I had acted out of spite rather than any genuine concern for justice or protecting victims. "Isn't it true, Ms. Rodriguez, that you created that fake dating profile out of jealousy and spite?" he asked during cross-examination, clearly hoping to undermine my credibility with the jury. "I created the profile because I suspected my boyfriend was lying to me," I answered honestly. "I wanted to know the truth about our relationship and whether he was being faithful. And when you discovered he was active on dating apps, you immediately sought revenge by humiliating him publicly, correct?" he pressed, trying to make my actions seem vindictive and disproportionate. "I sent evidence of his lies to his mother because I thought she should know who her son really was," I replied firmly. I had absolutely no idea about the financial crimes at that point. I was just trying to protect myself from someone who was lying to me and manipulating me. "But you deliberately chose to expose him in the most public and humiliating way possible, didn't you?" he continued, clearly trying to make me seem like the villain in this situation. Assistant U.S. Attorney Chen objected before I could answer, but I was ready with my response anyway. "I chose to tell the truth about what Blake was doing. Blake chose to commit the crimes. Those are very different things, and I won't apologize for refusing to cover up his lies." The defense team rested their case after just 4 days, which seemed surprisingly short given the severity of the charges. Their basic argument was that Blake was simultaneously too stupid and too manipulated by others to be held responsible for a sophisticated 6-year fraud scheme that had victimized hundreds of people. The contradiction in this argument was obvious to everyone in the courtroom. You can't run a complex criminal enterprise for years, while also being too incompetent to understand what you're doing. The victim impact statements were by far the hardest part of the entire trial for everyone involved. 26 people stood up to tell the jury directly how Blake's crimes had affected their lives, their families, and their futures. The emotional weight of their testimony was overwhelming. Mrs. Dupuis spoke through tears about having to move in with her daughter because she could no longer afford her apartment after losing her life savings. The independence she had worked her entire life to maintain was gone, and she felt like a burden on her family for the first time in her 84 years. Mr. Wagner talked about the shame he felt having to tell his grandchildren that there was no longer any college fund for them. He had promised them he would help with their education, and now he felt like he had failed them as a grandfather. Linda Martinez read a statement from her father, who had been too embarrassed and ashamed to attend the trial in person. "I came to this country with nothing and worked for 55 years to build something for my family," his statement read. "In 10 minutes of trusting the wrong person, I lost it all completely. I don't think I'll ever trust anyone again, and I hate that Blake Martinez took that away from me too." But the most powerful statement came from Vanessa, who had flown back from Tampa specifically to address the court directly. "Your Honor, Blake Martinez didn't just steal money from me and these other victims. He stole our ability to trust our own judgment. Every relationship I've had since Blake, I've wondered, are they lying to me? What aren't they telling me? What signs am I missing? The financial victims here lost their savings, which is terrible and life-changing. But I lost 3 years of my life and my faith in my own instincts. That's damage you can't calculate in dollars, and it's something that affects every aspect of your life going forward." Blake's sentencing hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks after the verdict was announced. The jury had found him guilty on all counts: wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, identity theft, and racketeering. Patricia had been convicted on the financial crimes but was acquitted on the racketeering charge, though she still faced significant prison time. Blake's lawyer made one final, desperate attempt to portray him as a troubled young man who had made serious mistakes but could still be rehabilitated if given the chance. "Your Honor, my client is only 30 years old," his attorney argued during the sentencing hearing. "He has his whole life ahead of him to make amends for these crimes. A lengthy prison sentence serves no one's interests and prevents him from ever being able to pay back the victims he has harmed." Judge Reinhart clearly wasn't buying this argument at all. Her response was swift and decisive. "Mr. Martinez, you have shown a consistent pattern of predatory behavior that spans multiple states and multiple years. You deliberately targeted vulnerable people who trusted you specifically because of your mother's position in the religious community. You showed absolutely no remorse for your actions until you were caught, and even then, your primary concern was avoiding consequences rather than helping your victims recover what you stole from them." She continued with obvious anger in her voice. "The court sentences you to 15 years in federal prison, followed by 6 years of supervised probation. You are ordered to pay full restitution to all victims, totaling $2,647,892. Additionally, you are permanently prohibited from engaging in any investment-related business activities for the remainder of your probation period." Patricia received 5 years in prison and was ordered to pay $920,000 in restitution. Essentially, everything she had left after legal fees were paid. The financial penalties meant that both Blake and Patricia would be financially ruined for the rest of their lives, even after serving their prison sentences. The media attention died down significantly after the sentencing, but the recovery process was really just beginning for all of us involved. The victim support group continued meeting monthly, and slowly, people started to heal both financially and emotionally from what had been done to them. Mr. Wagner, despite being 72 years old, found part-time work in construction consulting to help rebuild his savings. The local community rallied around him in an inspiring way, and several local businesses started hiring him for consulting work, recognizing both his expertise and his difficult situation. Mrs. Dupuis' daughter started a GoFundMe campaign that raised $38,000 to help with her mother's living expenses. The response was absolutely overwhelming, with people from across the country donating after reading about the case online. It restored some faith in humanity to see strangers coming together to help someone they'd never met. The Williams family received a surprise scholarship offer for their daughter from a local business owner who had followed the trial closely. "No child should lose their college opportunity because of someone else's greed," he said when he contacted them. These small acts of kindness helped restore some faith in humanity after everything that had happened. But the psychological damage was much harder to address than the financial losses. Many victims struggled with depression, anxiety, and a deep sense of betrayal that went far beyond money. The feeling of being fooled, of having your trust violated so completely, was something that couldn't be fixed with restitution payments. Dr. Fontaine started facilitating a specialized therapy group specifically for fraud victims, and we successfully lobbied several insurance companies to begin covering these sessions. It wasn't much, but it was something concrete that could help people process the emotional trauma of being systematically deceived and robbed. Vanessa made the surprising decision to stay in town permanently. She had fallen in love with the sense of community that had developed among the victims and wanted to continue helping prevent similar crimes from happening to other people. "I spent 4 years in Tampa trying to forget what Blake did to me," she told me over coffee one afternoon. "But running away from it didn't heal anything. Being here, helping other people understand that they're not alone in this experience, this feels like actual recovery and healing." She started working with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division as a victim advocate, helping other communities recognize and report investment fraud before it could cause widespread damage. Her first-hand experience with Blake's manipulation tactics made her incredibly effective at identifying similar schemes and helping potential victims understand what to look for. About 10 months after Blake's sentencing, I received a call that changed everything once again and showed me that the ripple effects of this case were still spreading far beyond what I had imagined. "Maya, this is Detective Chen. We need to talk urgently," she said when I answered the phone. "Can you come to the station today? This is important." My heart immediately sank, fearing the worst. Is Blake trying to appeal his conviction or something? Has something happened with his case? "No, it's not about Blake directly," she replied. "We've been contacted by authorities in Nevada about a similar fraud case. The suspect claims to know Blake personally, and your name came up in their investigation." At the police station, Detective Chen introduced me to Agent Rodriguez from the FBI's Financial Crimes Task Force, who had flown in specifically to discuss this new case with me. The seriousness of their expressions immediately told me that whatever they had discovered was significant. "Maya, we've been tracking a fraud ring that operates across multiple states, targeting religious communities with fake investment schemes," Agent Rodriguez began. "The pattern is almost identical to Blake's operation. Same tactics, same victim demographics. Even some of the exact same fake company names that Blake used in his schemes." He showed me surveillance photos of a man I didn't recognize, maybe 42 years old, well-dressed, and conventionally attractive in the same way that Blake had been. "This is Nicholas Weber," Agent Rodriguez explained. "He's been running the same type of Ponzi scheme in Nevada, Arizona, and Utah. When we arrested him last week, he claimed that Blake Martinez was his business mentor, and that you might have information about their partnership." My blood went completely cold as the implications of what he was saying sank in. "Partnership? What partnership? I don't know anything about Blake working with anyone else." "We think Blake's operation was actually part of a much larger network," Agent Rodriguez continued, pulling out a thick folder filled with documents. Nicholas had detailed files about Blake's specific techniques, victim lists from other states, and financial records showing regular payments between their operations. It appears they were sharing information and coordinating their activities. Over the next 4 hours, I walked through every detail I could remember about Blake's behavior during our relationship. The weekend trips he claimed were for business conferences, the new clothes and expensive restaurants he could somehow afford on his supposedly modest income, and the phone calls he would take in another room, claiming they were boring work-related conversations. There was this one time, I remembered suddenly, a memory surfacing that I hadn't thought about in months. Blake got a call late at night from someone named Nicholas. I only heard Blake's side of the conversation, but he was talking about expanding operations and exploring new territories. I asked him about it the next day, and he said it was just a business development call for his company. Agent Rodriguez and Detective Chen exchanged meaningful looks. "Maya, we think Blake was part of what's essentially a franchise operation," Agent Rodriguez explained. "Like a McDonald's for financial fraud. Nicholas would recruit people like Blake and Patricia, teach them the system, provide them with materials and victim lists, and then take a percentage of the profits from their operations. That's how they were able to operate in so many states without getting caught sooner," Detective Chen added. "They had a centralized system for sharing information about law enforcement activity, successful techniques, and potential victims. It was much more sophisticated than we initially realized." The implications were absolutely staggering. Blake wasn't just an individual criminal who had gotten greedy and started scamming people. He was part of an organized network that had been systematically targeting religious communities across the entire southwest region of the country. "How many people are we talking about here?" I asked, dreading the answer but needing to understand the full scope of what we were dealing with. "So far, we've identified similar operations in 9 states," Agent Rodriguez replied. "Conservatively, we're looking at over $18 million in losses and more than 900 victims. But we think there are probably more cases that haven't been reported yet." Agent Rodriguez leaned forward with a serious expression. Maya, we need your help with this investigation. You understand Blake's psychology better than anyone else involved in this case. You know how he built trust with people, how he identified potential victims, and how he maintained his cover story for so long. That insight could be crucial for identifying other operators in this network. Working with the FBI on this expanded investigation was both surreal and empowering. They brought me to Las Vegas to consult on Nicholas Weber's case, and I was amazed by how similar his entire operation was to Blake's scheme. He used the same fake business cards, made the same promises of 18% returns, targeted elderly church members in the exact same way, and even told some of the same lies about digital solutions and emerging markets. But Nicholas had made one crucial mistake that Blake had managed to avoid completely throughout his criminal career. He kept detailed records of his communications with other network members, including encrypted messages that law enforcement was able to recover and decode. Look at this! Agent Rodriguez showed me printouts of these recovered messages between Nicholas and at least 14 other people operating in different states. They were sharing victim lists, comparing techniques for building trust, and even warning each other about law enforcement activity in their areas. The content of these messages was absolutely chilling in their casual cruelty toward the victims. New marks in Tucson congregation. One message read, "Widow 75 owns home outright. Estimate $220,000 available. Recommend grief counseling approach for maximum emotional vulnerability." Another message said, "Problem with the Reno operation. Local victim getting suspicious and asking too many questions. May need to accelerate timeline and extract funds immediately before situation deteriorates further." These weren't desperate people making bad decisions under pressure. These were professional criminals who had turned financial elder abuse into a systematic business model, complete with established procedures, shared resources, and coordinated strategies for exploiting vulnerable people. Over the next 8 months, I worked closely with federal agents in 6 different states, helping them understand the psychological profile of the fraud network's operators and how they selected and manipulated their victims. My insights into Blake's behavior patterns and manipulation techniques helped them identify and arrest 13 more people who were involved in this criminal enterprise. Each arrest led to more victims coming forward with their stories, more evidence of systematic abuse across multiple communities, and more heartbreaking accounts of trust betrayed by people who had presented themselves as upstanding members of society. But each arrest also led to more opportunities for recovery and justice. The FBI's asset forfeiture operations were incredibly successful in this case, ultimately recovering about $4.8 million in stolen funds from various accounts, properties, and investments that the criminal network had purchased with their victims' money. This recovered money was distributed proportionally to victims across all the cases, based on how much each person had lost. Mrs. Dupuy received back $21,000 of her original $52,000 loss. While it wasn't everything she had lost, it was enough to allow her to move back into her own apartment and regain some of the independence that had been stolen from her. Mr. Wagner recovered $14,000, which wasn't a complete restoration of his losses, but was sufficient to make a real difference in his daily life and his ability to help his grandchildren with some of their educational expenses. More importantly than the financial recovery, the arrests disrupted an entire criminal network that had been operating successfully for over a decade. Future potential victims were protected from falling prey to these schemes, and religious communities across multiple states were warned about the specific tactics these criminals used to gain trust and exploit generosity. The experience of working with federal law enforcement changed my perspective on everything that had happened to me. I had started this journey thinking I was dealing with one cheating boyfriend who had lied to me about our relationship. I ended up helping expose a criminal enterprise that had systematically devastated hundreds of families across multiple states for years. Dr. Fontaine helped me process the magnitude of what I had accidentally uncovered through my decision to confront Blake about his dating app activity. "Maya, you have to understand that your actions didn't just protect you from Blake's harassment," she said during one of our sessions. "They protected hundreds of potential future victims from financial devastation. That's not a small thing." "But I didn't know any of that when I sent those screenshots to Patricia," I protested. "I was just hurt and angry about being lied to and cheated on." "Exactly," she replied. "You acted on instinct to protect yourself and demand the truth, and that instinct led to justice for hundreds of other people. That's not coincidence. That's your character asserting itself under pressure." Looking back, I could see that every decision I had made throughout this entire ordeal, from creating the fake dating profile to posting in the church Facebook group to refusing to lie for Blake, had been about refusing to accept lies as normal or acceptable behavior. I hadn't set out to be anyone's hero or to expose a criminal conspiracy. I had simply decided that I deserved the truth about my relationship, and that I wouldn't pretend everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. About a year and a half after Blake's sentencing, I received a letter that made me realize the ripple effects of our case were still spreading in ways I never could have imagined. It was from a woman named Grace Thompson in Tucson, written in careful handwriting on flowered stationery. "Dear Maya," the letter began, "you don't know me, but you saved my life and my financial future. I was about to invest my deceased husband's life insurance money with someone who claimed to be a business partner of Blake Martinez. When I Googled Blake's name to research his company background, I found articles about your case and the criminal network he was part of." The letter continued, "I immediately reported the man to the FBI, and it turns out he was part of the same criminal network that you helped expose. Thank you for being brave enough to tell your story publicly, even when people were blaming you and making your life difficult. Your courage saved me from losing everything I had left." That letter was the first of many I received over the following months. I got dozens of emails and letters from people across the country who had avoided scams specifically because they had read about Blake's case online and recognized similar warning signs in their own situations. Some people had been literally sitting in fake investment presentations when they remembered the news stories about our case and decided to walk out immediately. Others had done quick internet searches when something felt off about a too-good-to-be-true opportunity, and finding information about Blake's tactics had saved them from making devastating financial decisions. The FBI estimated that the media coverage of our case had prevented an additional $6 to $9 million in fraud losses by making people more aware, more skeptical, and more willing to research investment opportunities before committing their money. Vanessa and I started getting invitations to speak at community events about financial fraud prevention. At first, it felt strange being seen as an expert when I had been so completely fooled myself by someone I trusted and loved. But our first-hand experience with manipulation tactics resonated with audiences in a way that statistics and warnings from government officials never could. We could describe exactly how these criminals built trust, how they identified vulnerable targets, and how they made their schemes seem legitimate and safe. The thing about con artists, I would tell groups during our presentations, is that they don't target stupid people. They target trusting people. They target people who see the best in others, who want to believe in opportunities, and who've been taught to respect authority figures and community leaders. If you're beating yourself up for falling for a scam, you're blaming the wrong person entirely. Our presentations became popular enough that the FBI started officially recommending us for their community outreach programs. Vanessa and I developed a comprehensive curriculum about recognizing manipulation tactics across different types of scams, from romance scams to investment fraud to charity cons to recovery scams that targeted people who had already been victimized once. The most rewarding part of these speaking engagements was watching audience members connect the dots about their own experiences. After one presentation in Utah, an elderly man approached us with tears in his eyes, clearly emotional about what he had just heard. "8 months ago, someone tried to sell me exactly the investment opportunity you described in your presentation," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "I almost wrote them a check for $60,000, my entire retirement savings. But something you said about how they rushed me and didn't want me to discuss it with my family, that's exactly what happened to me." He continued, "I went home and told my daughter about the opportunity, and she talked me out of it completely. She said something felt wrong about the high-pressure tactics and the promises that seemed too good to be true. Hearing your presentation today, I realize how close I came to losing everything." These conversations reminded me constantly why going through the entire nightmare with Blake had ultimately been worth it. Yes, I had lost 3 years of my life to his lies and manipulation. Yes, I had been harassed, threatened, and blamed by people who didn't understand the situation. But if my experience could prevent even one elderly person from losing their life savings to predators like Blake, it felt meaningful and important. The most unexpected development came 20 months after the original trial, when I received another call from Agent Rodriguez that would lead to yet another shocking discovery. "Maya, we've got a situation developing in Salt Lake City," he said when I answered the phone. "The local FBI field office arrested someone claiming to be Blake's brother, and we wanted to run this by you. Does this ring any bells?" "Blake doesn't have a brother," I said immediately, remembering his family structure clearly. "Just his sister Bella, who actually helped expose him by showing me those photos." "That's exactly what we thought," Agent Rodriguez replied. "But this guy, Vincent Martinez, has been running investment scams using the family name and telling victims he's continuing Blake's legitimate business operations. He's specifically offering to help them recover their losses from the original fraud scheme." I felt physically sick to my stomach hearing this. "He's scamming the victims again? The same people who already lost money to Blake?" "Exactly," Agent Rodriguez confirmed. "And he's specifically targeting people who lost money in Blake's scheme. He somehow got access to victim lists and has been contacting them directly, claiming he can get their money back if they invest in his recovery fund. He's been telling victims that you're working with him personally and that you've recommended his services." This represented a new level of evil that I couldn't have imagined. Not only were criminals stealing from vulnerable people, but they were coming back to steal from the same victims again by exploiting their desperation to recover their initial losses. He's been using your name and reputation to gain credibility with victims, Agent Rodriguez continued. Several people have mentioned that Vincent told them you were personally involved in helping victims recover their funds, and that you had specifically recommended working with him. The audacity was absolutely breathtaking. This complete stranger was using my name and the reputation I had built as a victim advocate to scam the very people I had been trying to help throughout this entire ordeal. What do you need from me? I asked, knowing that I had to help stop this immediately. We're setting up a sting operation, Agent Rodriguez explained. We need you to call Vincent Martinez and arrange a meeting, ostensibly to discuss collaborating on helping victims recover their money. We'll be recording everything he says, and your participation will help us document the scope of his fraudulent claims. 3 weeks later, I found myself in an FBI surveillance van outside a Salt Lake City hotel, wearing a wire and preparing to confront yet another member of Blake's extended criminal network. The whole situation felt surreal, but I knew it was necessary to protect the victims who had already suffered enough. Vincent Martinez looked nothing like Blake when I met him in the hotel restaurant. He was shorter, older, with graying hair and thick glasses, but his pitch was disturbingly familiar to anyone who had heard Blake's manipulation tactics before. Maya, I'm so glad you called, he said enthusiastically as we sat down for coffee. I've been following your advocacy work closely, and I think we can really help these poor people get their money back. They've suffered enough, and they deserve justice. How exactly would that work? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady while the recording equipment captured everything he said. Well, I've been tracking down Blake's hidden assets, he explained with obvious excitement. There are offshore accounts, cryptocurrency wallets, and real estate investments that the FBI missed during their investigation. But I need seed money to hire the specialized recovery services that can access these accounts. He leaned forward conspiratorially. If victims invest in the recovery fund I'm establishing, I can guarantee they'll get back at least 175% of their original losses. It's a sure thing because I know exactly where Blake hid the money. He was literally describing another Ponzi scheme, using the promise of recovering money from the first Ponzi scheme as bait. The victims would end up losing money twice to essentially the same type of con, just with a different person running it. What makes you think Blake had hidden assets that law enforcement missed? I pressed, trying to get him to reveal more details about his scheme while the recording equipment captured everything. Vincent's eyes lit up with what seemed like genuine excitement as he prepared to share what he clearly thought was his ace in the hole. Because I helped him hide them in the first place, he said confidently. I was his financial advisor before the arrest, so I know exactly where everything is located. But I need liquidity to access the accounts and pay the international recovery fees. Even through my disgust at what he was doing to vulnerable people, I had to admire the FBI's strategy. They had gotten him to confess to being part of the original conspiracy, while simultaneously documenting his new fraud scheme, all in one recorded conversation. The sting operation led directly to Vincent's arrest, and the discovery of yet another network of fake recovery services that were specifically targeting fraud victims across multiple states. It turned out that recovery room scams were a huge secondary market, with criminals specifically seeking out people who had already lost money to financial fraud. That experience taught me something important about the psychology of crime victims that I hadn't fully understood before. The desperation to recover losses makes people vulnerable to exactly the same tactics that fooled them in the first place. It's not stupidity or naivety, it's hope combined with shame and financial pressure that clouds judgment. Vanessa and I started incorporating recovery scam warnings into our presentations, but we also began advocating for better support systems for fraud victims. Most people who lose money to cons face not just financial hardship, but social isolation and psychological trauma that makes them vulnerable to additional exploitation. We worked with Dr. Fontaine to establish a formal counseling program for financial crime victims, funded partly by asset forfeiture money from the Blake Martinez case. The program provided free therapy, financial counseling, and legal assistance to help people rebuild their lives after being victimized. The legal assistance component was particularly crucial because many victims faced secondary financial problems as a direct result of the fraud. Bounced checks, missed mortgage payments, and damaged credit scores were common issues. The ripple effects of losing life savings extended far beyond the initial theft and could destroy people's financial stability for years. Our victim advocacy work eventually caught the attention of the National Association of Securities Dealers, who invited us to join a task force developing new investor protection guidelines. It was surreal sitting in boardrooms with financial industry executives, sharing insights about how criminals exploit trust and authority to manipulate victims. The problem isn't that people are too trusting, I told one group of investment advisors during a task force meeting. The problem is that legitimate businesses and criminal organizations often use exactly the same relationship-building techniques. professional appearance, community connections, promises of exclusive opportunities. These are standard sales tactics used by honest companies, too. I continued, victims can't tell the difference between legitimate and criminal operations because there often isn't one until it's too late. The criminals are using the same playbook that honest businesses use to build trust and credibility. The task force's recommendations led to new disclosure requirements for investment advisors and stricter verification procedures for community-based investment opportunities. These were small changes, but ones that could prevent a lot of heartache in the future by making it harder for criminals to exploit community connections. Update 4 months later. A few people have been asking for an update on how everything turned out, so I thought I'd share what's been happening since the trials ended. The aftermath has been really interesting in ways I didn't expect. Blake's story apparently made the rounds in our local dating scene, and I've had multiple women reach out to thank me for posting about it publicly. It turns out his behavior was something of an open secret among certain groups of people. Several women had dated him briefly over the years, and had compared notes afterward about his manipulative behavior. But no one had ever put together the full picture of what he was really doing. One woman, Melissa, reached out to tell me that Blake had actually scammed her out of $3,000 for an investment opportunity, just 3 months before we broke up. She had been too embarrassed to report it at the time because she felt stupid for trusting him with her money. But seeing my church post gave her the courage to file her own police report, which ended up helping the prosecutor's case significantly by establishing an additional pattern of financial manipulation. Patricia reached out to me once about a month after the sentencing. She wanted to apologize and explain her side of the story, but honestly, her explanation was just more excuses and justifications. It was more, you don't understand how hard it is to be a mother. And Blake has good in him. He just makes bad choices sometimes. I told her firmly that good people don't harass elderly grandmothers or steal from churches, and that being someone's mother doesn't mean you have to enable their criminal behavior. She hung up on me, which pretty much confirmed that she still didn't understand the seriousness of what they had done. The church community has been surprisingly supportive overall. Several members have reached out to apologize for any role they played in enabling Blake's behavior through their trust and financial support. More importantly, they've implemented new financial oversight policies to prevent future embezzlement, and have started a support group specifically for fraud victims that has apparently helped a lot of people process their experiences. My grandmother Rose recovered fully from her panic attack, thankfully, but the experience changed her in some interesting ways. She made me promise to never let another man disrespect our family like Blake did. The funny thing is, she's 80 years old now, and has started using phrases like block his ass when talking about dealing with problematic people, which is both hilarious and oddly empowering to hear from someone her age. I've been working with a local domestic violence organization, sharing my story at their workshops about digital stalking and financial abuse. It's been therapeutic for me, and apparently helpful for other women who are trying to recognize warning signs in their own relationships before things escalate to dangerous levels. The work has taught me that what I experienced with Blake, the isolation, the lies, the financial manipulation, the harassment campaign when I tried to leave, these are all classic patterns of abusive behavior that extend far beyond romantic relationships. Dating has been weird since everything happened, but I'm taking it very slow and being much more intentional about the process. I'm upfront about my recent experience, not in a trauma-dumping way, but in a, this is what I learned about myself and what I need in a relationship way. It's actually been a surprisingly good filter for finding emotionally mature people. Anyone who gets weird about my story or tries to minimize what happened isn't someone I want to be with anyway. The right person will understand and respect what I've been through. Zoe jokes that I should write a book called How to Catch Your Cheating Boyfriend Using His Own Stupidity. But honestly, I hope no one else ever needs that advice. I hope other people trust their instincts earlier than I did, and don't ignore red flags the way I did for so long. The best part of this whole experience has been reconnecting with my own strength and learning to trust my judgment again. For 3 years, I made myself smaller to fit into Blake's version of our relationship. I ignored red flags, dismissed my instincts, and prioritized his comfort over my own well-being and mental health. Now I know exactly what I'm worth, and it's definitely not someone who calls me clingy for wanting a committed, honest relationship. It's not someone who lies to my face and expects me to smile about it. And it's absolutely not someone who would target my grandmother to get back at me for exposing their lies. I'm worth someone who deletes their dating apps without being asked, someone who introduces me to their friends with genuine pride, not as a problem to be managed or hidden. Someone who, when confronted with evidence of their own wrongdoing, takes responsibility instead of launching a harassment campaign. Basically, I'm worth an actual adult. Who knew that was such a revolutionary concept? To anyone dealing with something similar to what I went through, here's my advice. Trust your instincts. Take screenshots of everything suspicious. Tell people you trust about what's happening. Don't let anyone convince you that protecting yourself is somehow destroying them. People who are truly innocent don't need to be protected from the truth. And if you're tempted to enable someone's bad behavior because you love them, remember that love doesn't mean accepting lies and manipulation. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is hold someone accountable for their actions, even if they hate you for it, especially if they hate you for it. Final thoughts. Someone asked me recently if I regret how I handled the situation, or if I would have done anything differently knowing what I know now. Honestly, I wish I had trusted my instincts sooner than I did. I wish I had asked harder questions when Blake's stories didn't add up properly. I wish I had listened to that little voice in my head that kept saying something was off, instead of convincing myself I was being paranoid or overly suspicious. But do I regret exposing him and everything that followed? Absolutely not. Blake made his choices. He chose to cheat, lie, steal, and harass people. He chose to target vulnerable people and exploit their trust for financial gain. He chose to escalate his behavior when faced with consequences for his actions. He chose to involve my family and friends in his campaign of harassment. I just chose to stop pretending that those choices didn't matter, or that they were somehow acceptable behavior that I should tolerate. That's not revenge, that's reality. And reality, it turns out, has a way of catching up with people who think they're too smart to get caught, even if it takes a fake dating profile and a determined ex-girlfriend to make it happen. The ripple effects of this case have shown me that sometimes one person's decision to tell the truth can protect countless others from harm. The FBI estimates that exposing Blake's network prevented millions more in losses and protected hundreds of potential future victims. That knowledge makes everything I went through, the harassment, the blame, the stress, the media attention, completely worth it. If my experience helps even one person recognize manipulation tactics or trust their instincts about someone who seems too good to be true, then all the difficulty was meaningful. I've learned that refusing to accept lies as normal isn't vindictive or cruel. It's necessary. It's how we protect ourselves and others from people who see kindness and trust as weaknesses to exploit. Blake Martinez is currently serving his 15-year sentence in federal prison. Patricia is serving her 5-year sentence as well. The criminal network they were part of has been largely dismantled, though law enforcement continues to investigate similar operations in other regions. The victim support group continues to meet monthly, and many people have been able to rebuild their financial stability with help from the restitution payments and community support that developed after the case became public. Vanessa and I continue our fraud prevention speaking engagements, and the victim advocacy program we helped establish has expanded to serve multiple states. Most importantly, I've rebuilt my life on a foundation of honesty and self-respect. I know who I am, what I deserve, and what I won't tolerate. That's knowledge that no one can ever take away from me, no matter what they try to do.